10 days ago, my mother was deceived into a cult organization called Joyful Church, losing both wealth and beauty, and was bullied severely by those male elders who trapped her by the neck. To save her, I also mixed in, but unexpectedly, my mother and I fell into hell together. In the stuffy room, I hid behind the door, observing my mother's every move. She was dressed lightly, kneeling on the ground, repeatedly striking her upper body with a ruler. Smack! Smack! Each strike left a crimson mark, making me feel pain. But my mother had a devout and intoxicated expression on her face. She chanted, "Joyful Lord, grant me youth, I am willing to attach, return to being young." Then she took out a barbed whip and repeatedly struck herself. After a few lashes, blood beads began to seep from her smooth back. Just as I was about to rush out to stop her, a man's voice suddenly came from the room. It startled me and stopped my steps. "Roshu believer, proceed to the next step." Hearing this, my mother stood up in fear and struck her thigh hard with the whip. Only then did I see the phone in front of her. My mother was actually video chatting with a man? This whipping lasted a long time, until my mother was covered in blood marks before they finally let her stop. Then they made her take out a yellow talisman paper and stick it on her body. Today's rejuvenation ceremony was very successful. You must practice diligently this week and obey the teacher's summons at any time. After the call ended, I looked at my mother, who was carefully getting dressed, and my heart was filled with mixed feelings. Half a year ago, my parents divorced. My dad cheated on a young and beautiful girl, and after my mom found out, he simply confessed, saying he had long been dissatisfied with my mother's looseness. After the divorce, my mother seemed like a different person. She started skincare, fitness, and, through her friend Aunt Xiaohuan's introduction, attended Joyful Church courses. After a few sessions, my mother indeed radiated youth from the inside out, and her figure became increasingly toned. But her behavior became more and more strange. My mother used to be gentle and reserved, avoiding eye contact with men. But ever since she attended Joyful Church, her behavior became increasingly open, and her clothing became sexy and revealing. When she encountered the neighbor uncle in the elevator, she even took the initiative to flirt with him, speaking very frivolously. Watching the uncle blush and laugh non-stop because of her, I heard the neighborhood gossip about my mother and felt disgusted with Joyful Church. And today, seeing my mother's series of outrageous actions with my own eyes, I am 100% sure that Joyful Church is a lewd cult that has corrupted my mother. A rustling sound came from behind the door. My mother, dressed, put the ruler and whip into the drawer and went out. After she walked far away, I opened that mysterious drawer to see what else was inside. Besides what I had just seen, there was also a book of Joyful Church doctrines. After just a glance, I was so embarrassed by the pictures and content inside that my face turned red. I carefully put the book back and opened a sandalwood box, which contained a bottle of red powder. I poured some into my palm and rubbed it. It was very smooth and fine, with a faint fragrance. I couldn't help but lean closer to my nose and sniff a few times. The scent immediately penetrated my nasal cavity and into my chest and lungs, making me itch. In less than a few seconds, my heart began to race, and my breathing became heavy. Sweat beads formed densely on my back and neck. The feeling of heat grew stronger. I felt like a fish in the desert, extremely uncomfortable. Yeah. Cold water splashed on my face, and my senses finally returned a bit. Opening my eyes to see my mother's familiar face, I dared to relax my tense nerves. Mom, save me. That night, my mother repeatedly wiped my body with a cold towel to cool me down until dawn, when I finally returned to normal. After waking up, I advised her not to continue like this. The so-called joyful church was not a good thing. What legitimate organization would give people such drugs? But my mother told me that joyful church had long become her spiritual support. It was the church that transformed her into a charming woman. She would rather die than leave the church. Saying this, she really picked up the fruit knife on the table and cut towards her wrist, although I quickly snatched it away. But she still made a long cut. Looking at the blood gushing out, I had no doubt about my mother's determination to die at that moment. I didn't dare to push her further, telling myself that I needed time to let my mother change slowly. But the subsequent developments became increasingly uncontrollable. Except for my room, every corner of the house was equipped with cameras by my mother. She was obsessed with the feeling of being monitored. Whenever someone on the other end made her perform those undignified actions through her phone, my mother enjoyed it. What made me even more uneasy was that the person on the other side seemed to have their eyes on me. Several times I noticed that the cameras in the house adjusted their direction as I moved. Joyful Church held gatherings every week, and the appearance requirements for attendees were very high. To be able to attend, my mother spared no expense on cosmetic surgery, and when standing next to me, an 18-year-old, she looked like a pair of sisters. She also frequently donated money to the church, and the property she received during the divorce was being squandered away. But the more this happened, the happier my mother became. Every time she returned from the church, she was full of smiles, telling me she was the most popular woman in the church. But what I saw were her obvious bruises and blood marks, old wounds constantly adding new ones. Furious, I blocked her at the door when she was about to go to the church again. Mom, I won't allow you to go to that church anymore. But she casually bypassed me and was pulled back by me. Mom, that joyful church is not decent. Look at how you are now. Isn't it embarrassing? Embarrassing? What do I have to be embarrassed about? My mother showed a frivolous smile. Love between men and women is human nature. As a normal woman, I satisfy my desires. What's wrong with that? I widened my eyes, unable to believe these words came from my mother's mouth. I could only sternly shout, "No going. If you step out of this door today, I'll die in front of you." My mother's hand froze in place. She turned her head to look at me. In my resolute gaze, she finally turned and walked towards the bedroom. If you don't want to go, then don't. Don't scare your mom with death. Her tone was cold and resentful. Why has my mother become like this now? At night, I pondered desperately about what other methods I could use to save my mom. Just as I was tossing and turning, unable to sleep, I suddenly heard my mom's footsteps coming out of the bedroom. Then, the front door opened, and a heavy step came in. Next, sounds of men and women in love filled the living room. I jumped out of bed, rushed out of the bedroom, and crazily pushed and shoved them as they tangled together. Do you still have any shame? If you can't go out, you call a man to your home to mess around? After pushing my mom away, I went to hit that man. Get out! Pervert! I was like a furious little beast, recklessly clawing at the man's face, drawing blood. Yet my mom repeatedly blocked me, not letting me hit him. The man was ultimately frightened by my momentum, hurriedly put on his pants, and fled to the door in a disheveled state. As he left, he trembled and pointed at me, saying to my mom, Your daughter is full of evil energy. It's her who has disturbed your home." After the men left, the room fell silent, and my mom stared at me with an extremely unfamiliar gaze, making me feel cold all over. Once I calmed down, I wanted to have a good talk with my mom, but she grabbed my wrist tightly. "Yu, you're coming with me to church tomorrow." "Is she crazy? She actually wants to take me to jump into that fire pit?" I asked her with a trembling voice. "Mom, isn't it enough that you ruined yourself? Do you want to ruin me too? I haven't even been in a relationship. If people find out I went to that kind of place, will any boys still like me?" But she remained unshaken. "Yu, can you just help your mom a little? The master said you have evil energy, which is why the home is disturbed. As long as the evil spirit on you is driven away, everything will be fine." I questioned her why she would believe such nonsense. But she dragged me away without caring. "I'll take you to church. Let the master help drive away the evil on you." In this situation, I could only run away. In the quiet night, I wandered alone in the community for a long time. All I could recall were the bits and pieces of my mom's love for me from childhood to now. My mom had been brainwashed by the Joy Church and had become their slave. As her only relative, I had to save her. But when I finally made up my mind to go home, I found out that my mom had gone to church again. I must bring her back. But I didn't know where the church was, so I could only call Aunt Xiaohuan to ask. After a few seconds of silence, Aunt Xiaohuan quickly sent me the location and said she would pick me up there. When I arrived by taxi, I found out it was a half-finished building. Aunt Xiaohuan, who was waiting for me in front of the building, pulled me in. We climbed up to the dark second floor in one breath, and only then did I see the light coming from the end of the corridor. Pushing open the door, it was a huge room filled with crazy men and women. When they saw me and Aunt Xiaohuan, they all stood up from the ground, surrounding us in the middle. At the innermost part was a woman kneeling on the ground, bare, carrying a cross, my mom. And sitting in front of her was a man dressed in a black robe with a wolf mask. He raised his hand and pointed at me, shouting loudly, "Dear church members, she is the evil spirit that has destroyed Ruosha's family. Capture her and everyone come to purify her and her mother together. Only then can we help Ruosha." I turned to escape but was grabbed back by countless hands. They covered my screaming mouth, pressed me hard to the ground, and shouted to purify me together. In my struggle, my strength was gradually exhausted. In despair, a warm and familiar embrace tightly held me from behind. It was my mom. I grabbed her outstretched hand, and she held me tightly too. But she wasn't there to save me. Instead, she took out a rope to bind my hands and feet. She picked me up and walked towards the group of men. Only if we are both purified together by the church members can mom become holy, be liked by more men, and get everything I want." That night, my mom transformed into a devil, personally sending me into hell. By the time the ceremony was announced to be over, I was already unable to move. My mom and Aunt Xiaohuan helped me up from the ground and said to me, "Now you are clean." My heart ached to the point of being unable to breathe. "Mom, do you even know what clean and dirty are?" I hoarsely scolded her for the harm she had done to me, but no matter how I cursed, my mom wore a carefree smile. "You just joined the church and don't understand yet. Later on, you will understand more and more the joy of women here." But how could I be happy? My mom locked me in a room, and regardless of day or night, I could hear the sounds of debauchery. The so-called joy in her mouth was, in my eyes, deep shame. On the third day of being locked up, my mom brought the so-called master of the Joy Church to see me. It turned out to be the man I had driven out of my house that night. As soon as he spoke, I recognized that he was the same person as the one in the black robe with the wolf mask. It was he who told my mom that I had evil energy. Hatred surged in my heart, and my eyes burned with anger. If my hands and feet weren't tied and I could move, I would definitely pounce on him and fight to the death. But now I could only sit there. I let him walk around me, splashing the so-called talisman holy water he held in his hands all over me. After doing everything, he handed my mom a whip the thickness of a finger. Although the evil energy on your daughter has been removed, it still lingers around her and won't disperse. She must be whipped 49 times every day for a week to completely drive it away. Yes, master. My mom took the whip from the man's hand with fear and trepidation, and in front of him, she struck me again and again. At first, it didn't hurt much, but as it went on, it felt increasingly fiery. By the time the 49 lashes were completely finished, my body was already covered in blood marks. The man called the master then took out a bottle of pink ointment and handed it to my mom. Apply this on her after each whipping. It will help her recover. My mom gratefully accepted the ointment, almost burying her head in the ground as she sent the man away. In the following time, she helped me treat the whip marks while whispering in my ear about the benefits of the Joy Church, persuading me to believe in it with her. I was so annoyed by her nagging that I simply closed my eyes. But the ointment she applied on me was very effective, cool and refreshing, quickly alleviating the pain in my body, allowing me to gradually relax and actually fall asleep. However, that night was very restless, filled with dreams of my mother. At times, it was her gentle and loving touch on my face, softly speaking to me. At other times, it was her frivolous smile, pulling me towards the abyss. Just as I was struggling, a sudden pain jolted me awake. I saw my mother standing in front of me with a blank expression, raising a whip and striking me repeatedly. It turned out another day had passed. In the following days, I spent my time in this chaotic state. But I horrifyingly discovered that I had become infatuated with the whipping my mother inflicted on me every day. To be precise, I was addicted to the feeling of being whipped and then soothed with ointment. By the 5th day, I actually began to crave my mother's beatings. At the same time, I also found myself enamored with the food here. Whether it was after eating or drinking water, there was a feeling of floating on clouds. A kind of indescribable joy emerged in my brain. Under this dual control, I gradually lost the thought of resistance. With my mother's persistent persuasion, I agreed to attend the evening gathering of the Joyful Church with her. The church members held a welcome ceremony for me. That night, I couldn't even distinguish between reality and illusion, and surprisingly accepted everything I had once despised and hated. I even felt an unprecedented joy within it. During a brief moment of clarity, I heard other church members sharing their stories. I discovered that everyone had experienced varying degrees of emotional trauma. When summarizing the reasons for their emotional failures, everyone said it was due to their lack of charm in relationships. Then everyone would thank the Joyful Church for their transformation. They claimed they had become more beautiful and handsome here, learning how to please the opposite sex. They expressed gratitude to the person they referred to as the Master for his teachings and changes. They were willing to dedicate everything to him. Body, money, soul. At first, I was still drifting between chaos and clarity. On one hand, I felt that everyone's devotion to the joyful church and the master was fanatical and absurd. On the other hand, I couldn't escape the joy brought by the drugs. Gradually, desire overcame reason and I sank deeper into the joyful church. I even began to compete with those female believers, trying every means to win the master's favor. Until one day, my mother and I were suddenly informed that we could no longer stay here. At the same time, we could no longer attend the evening gatherings. The reason was that my mother and I had not contributed to the church for a long time. We had neither brought in new members to strengthen the church nor invested money to improve conditions. Since that was the case, we could not share the fruits with others. Despite my mother and I pleading desperately, we were ultimately driven back. On the way back, my mother told me that as believers, we were supposed to support the church. This support was divided into two types. One was to donate money. The other was to bring new believers to the church. When we got home, my mother couldn't wait to pull out the bank book, but the few thousand yuan balance was not enough to support the church even once. With a face ashen as death, my mother threw the bank book down in despair and glared at me in frustration. "Useless fool, you've already been discarded by the master so quickly." I shrank into the corner as if I had done something wrong. My mother was right. I indeed hadn't learned well the ways to please men. Among this batch of newcomers, I was the one least favored by the master. That night, my mother and I couldn't sleep at all. As soon as I closed my eyes, everything about the church flooded my mind. After a night, both my mother and I had bloodshot eyes. I suggested to my mother to contact the master again to see if we could be allowed to go one more time. But I was met with my mother's firm refusal. She said that without being able to provide support, we had no right to make such a request. If we did that, it would only make the master dislike us even more. In this situation, aside from finding ways to provide support for the church, there was no other way. But for a moment, where could we find such a large sum of money? As we talked, my mother suddenly brightened up, excitedly grabbing my hand. "Yuye, aren't you about to start school soon? There are many beautiful girls in your university. If you bring a few to the church, everyone will definitely like them." Seeing my confused expression, my mother shook my shoulders a few times. "Yuye, you want to attend the evening gatherings every night, right? As long as we can attract new believers, we will become the most favored people in the church. By then, even if we have no money, we can still attend the gatherings every night, okay?" Suddenly, I had a brief moment of clarity, recalling the night my mother pushed me into hell. It seemed she also wanted to become the most favored woman. I was her sacrifice. Now she wanted me to find other sacrifices. Just as I was about to think further, the drugs that had been controlling me took effect again. In the painful torment, I lost my ability to think once more. A few days later, school started, and as a freshman, I was assigned to a dormitory with 3 other roommates. But my mind was completely not on studying. Looking at my 3 bright and youthful roommates, I felt envious and jealous. I even darkly thought about why they could live carefree while my youth had already turned into a pile of mud before it even began. With my mother's daily urging, I was constantly thinking of ways to trick my roommates into the church. I conveyed to them that women should value their bodies and beauty to attract more men. I even hinted to them that if they were interested, I could provide methods to become more beautiful. But my roommates were not interested in any of this. On the contrary, they were disgusted by my strange behavior. Yuye, why do you have so many weird thoughts? We should focus on our studies now. As for how to become beautiful and attract the opposite sex, that's not the priority in life right now. Your way of living is too unhealthy. They expressed their disapproval of these thoughts I conveyed more than once. One girl named Keek reacted especially strongly. Once, when it was just the two of us in the dorm, I once again preached to her about how girls should pay attention to enhancing their charm, and she suddenly fixed her gaze on me, her eyes full of inquiry. Yuye, have you joined some cult? I was caught off guard by her question, stunned in place, and hurriedly denied it incoherently. No, what cult? How could that be? She looked at me inquisitively for a few seconds and suddenly laughed. Just kidding, why are you so nervous? By the way, you tell us every day to enhance female charm and learn to please men. Your boyfriend must be very happy, right? What kind of person is your boyfriend? I was once again stunned by her question. Do I have a boyfriend? Since the day I was tricked into the joyful church by my mom, I had been possessed by different men. Later, I even took pride in being favored by that man called Master. But they couldn't be called my boyfriends at all. Thinking of this, my face turned red, and I shook my head repeatedly to deny it. No, I don't. That's good, Keek said with a somewhat inscrutable smile. Then let me introduce someone to you, okay? Huh? I looked at her in surprise as she took out her phone and sent me a photo of a boy. Look, this is my cousin, Chen Jiang. He graduated and has been working for 2 years. Isn't he tall and handsome? Just right for you? I was about to refuse, but she saw through me. You don't like such an excellent boy? Yuye, your standards are really high. How about this, if you agree to meet him, I'll agree to learn that stuff you mentioned, how about it? I felt a surge of joy in my heart. I didn't expect that after trying so hard for so long without achieving my goal, Keek would agree so easily today. As long as she agreed, I could trick her into going to church with me. Once we stepped in there, she would definitely be kept, and my mom and I would provide new strength for the church and be invited back to the gatherings. Thinking of this, I suddenly realized that my previous desire for the church seemed to have weakened. I remembered that when I first came to school, my mom would come to see me every 2 days, bringing me the snacks she made herself. But recently, she hadn't come for a long time. And the desire that had been controlled by medication seemed to have faded a lot. In an instant, I hesitated. Looking at Keek, who was looking down at her phone, did I really want to ruin such a good girl for my own selfish desires? Just as I was struggling, Keek suddenly looked up. I've made an appointment with my cousin. We'll meet at the school cafeteria tomorrow at noon. In the end, I swallowed the words that were on the tip of my tongue. Before going to bed, I scrolled through my chat history with my mom. The last message was her urging me to quickly trick my classmates, and the timestamp was still from last week. Silently pressing the power button, I decided not to tell her about Keek for now. The next day at noon, Keek took me to the cafeteria, where we met her cousin, who had been waiting there. He was a tall, handsome, clean-cut boy. Keek introduced us, saying his name was Chen Jiang. The moment I saw Chen Jiang, my face turned red. It was a feeling called infatuation. We sat down to chat. We ordered simple egg fried rice. Before eating, he carefully wiped the bowls and chopsticks for Keek and me, then neatly placed them in front of us. He talked to me about movies, music, and recent hot topics. I listened to him almost greedily, only to realize that the things I once liked seemed to have become memories from a past life. We exchanged contact information and agreed to go watch a movie together the next day. On the way back to the dorm, I almost cried several times. I felt like I was finally normal again. Keek smiled and asked me, "If you and my cousin hit it off, when will you teach me that stuff you mentioned?" Without thinking, I rejected her. Why learn that? Focus on studying. The next day, Chen Jiang and I went to watch a movie. After the show, I almost tripped and fell, but he caught my hand just in time. After that, we didn't let go of each other's hands. We officially started dating. With Chen Jiang's gentle care, my life seemed to get back on track. But the good times didn't last long. Just as I was immersed in happiness, everything was shattered again by a strange phone call. The call was from the police station, and a businesslike voice informed me that my mother was detained for suspected prostitution and that I needed to go pay a fine. This call, along with previous memories, hit me like a wave, making it hard for me to breathe. I cried under the covers all night, and the next morning, after washing my face, I walked out of the dorm and saw Chen Jiang waiting there. "You. Why are you here?" He held me tightly in his arms, looking pained. "Keek texted me saying you cried all night." I couldn't rest easy. I could no longer hold back my sorrow and buried my head in Chen Jiang's embrace, choking back tears. "Ye, what happened? Let me help you." But I didn't know how to say it. How could I tell Chen Jiang that my mom was a call girls, that I had been misled by her into a wrong path, that I had been mistreated by many men? I couldn't bring myself to say it. After crying for a long time, I finally lifted my head and forced a smile at Chen Jiang. "Something happened at home, but I can handle it myself. You should go back." After saying that, I turned to leave, but Chen Jiang's next words froze me in place. "Yeah, I know your mom was arrested for prostitution, and I also know which police station she's in." He continued, "Yeah, I know you are a member of the Joyful Church, and you joined this summer." I felt a chill run through me, and my vision darkened. It's over, he knows everything, and our relationship is over. Just as I was about to collapse, Chen Jiang supported me and said he wanted to tell me something. It turned out that Chen Jiang was a criminal police officer. Before he met me, he had been paying attention to the Joyful Church for a long time. Judging by various signs, this is a cult organization that uses the topic of enhancing the charm of both sexes to attract and control its followers. Unfortunately, the location chosen by the Joyful Church is very secretive and often changes. Its followers are thoroughly brainwashed by the leading teachers, and Chen Jiang and others have tried several times to dismantle this organization, but have struggled due to a lack of evidence. He once mentioned this organization in a casual chat with his cousin Keek. Keek, who was assigned to the same dormitory as me at the start of school, guessed from my strange behavior that I might be a member of the Joyful Church. So she pretended to introduce me to Chen Jiang through a blind date. During our step-by-step interactions, Chen Jiang discreetly tested me several times. Under my evasive words, he became increasingly convinced that I was indeed a member of the Joyful Church. "I'm sorry, yeah, I used you to solve the case, but the Joyful Church has harmed many people. You and your mother are victims. Delaying the dismantling will only create more victims like you. To prevent the same tragedy from happening, will you help me?" At that moment, for myself and for my mother, I firmly nodded. Chen Jiang lent me 5,000 yuan to pay the fine for my mother at the police station. After 3 days of detention, my mother was released. When she heard that I had persuaded my roommate Keek to attend a joyful church gathering, she screamed with joy. She hugged me tightly. Yeah, the hard days for Mom are finally over. Do you know? I've almost gone crazy during this time. I'll tell the master right away. We can finally attend the gathering again. I watched as my mother's fingers trembled while dialing the master's number, her voice slightly off-key with excitement. The master on the other end waited for her to finish before responding with a satisfied After so many days, your useless daughter has finally been of some use. By the way, have you been keeping a close eye on her as I instructed? Has the joyful church been fed to her on time? The people she brought won't be a problem, right? My mother showed a hint of guilt on her face but quickly masked it with a smile. Don't worry, I've been doing as you instructed. There won't be any problems. After hanging up, my mother casually touched my hair. Yeah, I've been busy lately and couldn't visit you in time. Are you feeling okay? Is there anything unusual? About that. Do you still want it? Do I need to thank you for being busy looking for men, Mom? It's precisely because of this that you gave me a chance to wake up. I suppressed my nausea and looked at her with the most sincere gaze. Yes, I really want it. Looking at my mother's relieved face, I secretly thought, Mom, I want to send all of you to prison. The next day, according to the plan set by Chen Jiang, Keek arrived at my house on time after dinner. As soon as she entered, she called out Auntie, and her obedient demeanor made my mom very satisfied. As it approached 10 o'clock, my mother took us out and called a taxi to a remote suburb. Both Keek and I knew that Chen Jiang and the others were tracking our location based on the positioning device on Keek. Half an hour later, the taxi finally arrived at the destination. It was still an unfinished building. As I got out of the car, I tightly held Kaka's hand. I had already decided in my heart that I would protect her even at the cost of my own life. A familiar scene unfolded before my eyes again, and when I saw the familiar men and women, I felt almost exhausted. I prayed repeatedly in my heart for Chen Jiang and the others to arrive quickly. But why were they coming so slowly? This group was about to grab Kaka's hands and feet, and they hadn't arrived yet. I couldn't care much anymore. I rushed forward to stand in front of Keek, allowing them to tear and beat me while I protected this girl. In the chaos, the positioning device stuck in Kaka's clothes fell to the ground and was picked up by the master. When he saw what it was, his expression changed drastically, and he turned to run. But how could I let him escape? Ignoring the pain in my body, I got up and chased after him. I chased him all the way to the 6th floor. I grabbed his robe, pulled his leg, and held onto his foot tightly. The master's expression became increasingly ferocious, filled with murderous intent, and he pushed me down from the 6th floor. As I fell, I heard the sound of police sirens getting closer. I was in a coma in the hospital for 3 months, and Keek and Chen Jiang took care of me the whole time. On the day I woke up, Keek held my hand, excitedly crying and laughing. She said I was a hero because I had dismantled the harmful organization of the joyful church. I turned my head and happened to see Chen Jiang standing at the door with red eyes. He walked firmly to my side. Yu, give me another chance. Let us fall in love again, okay?